Hi, and welcome to Act on Mental Health. My name is Sean Hardy. I'm a licensed mental health counselor based here in Fort Wayne, Indiana. On this channel, I discuss ACT topics and principles for those who want to learn acceptance and commitment therapy, whether you're a therapist or client. This video is the first in a series on key principles and techniques in ACT, based on the comprehensive framework used by both clinicians and researchers alike. Each of these videos will be a little bit longer, but packed with everything that you need to know about ACT, whether you're just getting started or building on your ACT skills. Today's video will walk through the key behavioral principles in ACT. These ideas are foundational and influence how ACT understands and works with human behavior. So let's get started. When people hear CBT, the focus usually lands on the cognitive part, challenging thoughts, changing beliefs. But there's another side of the coin, behavior. And ACT, while part of the CBT family, leans heavily on this behavioral tradition. Rather than aiming to dispute thoughts, ACT asks a different question. What does this person do in response to their internal experience? And how can they behave more flexibly in the presence of difficult thoughts and feelings? The foundation comes from behavioral science, specifically radical behaviorism, which doesn't separate external actions from internal ones. Thoughts, emotions, sensations, urges, all of these are seen as behaviors in their own right. Instead of isolating behavior as something separate from the person, ACT considers behavior in context. We look at what came before and what follows after, and how it serves the person's goals or values. This perspective allows us to guide clients not by trying to fix what's inside their heads, but by helping them relate to it differently and take meaningful action. Associations form quickly, and they often operate just below the surface. Imagine a child who gets excited every time they hear the sound of a spoon tapping a bowl. Why? Because it usually means dessert is coming. That sound becomes linked with pleasure even before the food appears. That's classical conditioning in action. This form of learning, also called respondent conditioning, shapes a lot of our emotional responses. A person who felt panicked, for example, during a crowded event, may start feeling anxious anytime they hear loud music or enter a busy space. Over time, these responses can generalize to more and more contexts, limiting behavior in subtle but powerful ways. ACT doesn't aim to reverse those associations. Instead, it helps people to notice them and expand their response options so that they aren't bound to a life of avoidance or reactivity. Whether it's joy linked with the smell or fear linked with a place, the principle remains the same. Associations shape behavior, but with awareness and values-based action, we can respond differently. Consequences are always at play in human behavior, and understanding them helps us to see why people repeat certain actions, even when those actions aren't in their long-term interest. Picture someone who's anxious about attending a meeting. They cancel, and their anxiety drops. That drop in anxiety, it's reinforcing. The brain takes note. That worked. So next time, avoidance is more likely. This is the ABC model in action. Antecedents is the situation or trigger, behavior is the response, consequence is the outcome. If the consequence reduces discomfort, the behavior becomes more likely, especially when that relief is immediate. ACT helps clients zoom out from this cycle, asking what are the long-term costs or short-term reliefs? In therapy, we explore both reinforcements and punishment, but we also highlight extinction, when a behavior fades because the reinforcement no longer shows up. If someone always avoids and that avoidance no longer brings the expected relief, it may open the door to trying something new. We don't use reinforcements and punishments necessarily in therapy. We say things like, is that moving you toward or away from the person that you want to become? And hopefully the client will realize that that behavior isn't working. It isn't getting them what they want. Now, not all actions are created equal, even if they look the same on the outside. The key lies in understanding what's pulling or pushing the behavior. When behavior is motivated by something meaningful, like connection, growth, or curiosity, it's often under appetitive control. The person is moving toward a desired experience. On the other hand, aversive control shows up when behavior is driven by a desire to escape, avoid, or reduce discomfort. Think of someone who volunteers in their community. If it's fueled by a sense of purpose, that's appetitive. But if they do it mainly to avoid guilt or avoid saying no, it may be more aversive. One behavior, two different functions. ACT helps people notice whether their actions are about moving toward values or away from discomfort. That shift can create clarity and ultimately more choice. The meaning of behavior shifts depending on the environment, history, and intentions behind it. That's the core of functional contextualism, the philosophical foundation of ACT. Rather than analyzing behavior in isolation, we examine it in context. If someone spends hours preparing for a speech, is that a sign of care and preparation or fear and perfectionism? It depends on the context. In ACT, the act in context is the unit of analysis. We ask, what's the behavior, why is it happening, and what surrounds it, internally and externally? This lens helps us to stop chasing surface level explanations and start understanding the patterns that shape a person's actions over time. It also keeps therapy grounded in practicality. What works for this person in this moment given their history and values? The truth criterion is on what works. Truth in ACT isn't about finding absolute answers. It's about workability. Traditional models might ask, is this belief true? But ACT asks, does this belief help you to live the life that you want? That's a pragmatic approach to truth. The value of a thought or behavior depends on its usefulness. Now imagine someone who often thinks, I'll mess this up. That might be objectively debatable, but more importantly, does that thought help them show up for the things that matter? Or does it pull them into avoidance? This shift from rightness to helpfulness gives clients more freedom. It invites experimentation. Let's see what happens when you hold that thought lightly. Can you still take a step toward what matters, even if the thought's still there? By letting go of the need to be right and leaning into what works, people often discover new paths forward. Two people might engage in the same exact behavior, but for entirely different reasons. That's why ACT places so much emphasis on function over form. Take a client who keeps their home spotless. One does it because they enjoy the beauty and calm, and another does it out of fear of being judged or feeling unsafe. Again, the same action, different purpose. When we ask clients, what is this behavior in the service of? It helps them to see patterns. Is the action helping them move towards something they care about, or is it helping them to get away from something uncomfortable? This kind of functional understanding sets the stage for interventions that actually work because they're based on why the behavior exists, not just what it looks like. Looking only at the surface of a behavior limits us. ACT pushes us to dig deeper. A behavior like gambling, scrolling on your phone, or avoiding conversations might look different from person to person, but often serves the same function, reducing emotional discomfort. It's not the action itself, it's what the person gets from it that matters. This functional view helps us to work across diagnostic categories. Whether someone's avoiding pain through overeating, overworking, or withdrawing socially, we can ask, what's reinforcing this pattern? And what might offer a more workable alternative? We don't need to match protocols to symptoms. Instead, we can meet people where they are and help them shift towards behavior that more aligns with their values, even if discomfort comes along for the ride. Behavior doesn't just happen in a vacuum. The same action can mean very different things depending on where, why, and in what state it occurs. Consider someone who gives you a glass of water. If you're in a conference room, that might feel awkward because you didn't ask for it. But if you're dehydrated after a long hike, it feels like kindness or even rescue. Same action, completely different meaning. In ACT, context matters. That includes not just the physical setting, but emotional state, cultural background, social dynamics, and learning history. A client's thought like, I'm worthless, might show up in a context of self-punishment or in a space of gentle observation. The thought hasn't changed, but the impact has. This is why ACT focuses less on changing the content of thoughts and more on changing the context in which those thoughts arise. We help people build awareness of the conditions surrounding their experience so they can respond with flexibility, not habit. Whether through mindfulness, values work, or diffusion, the aim is to shift the landscape in which thoughts and behavior unfold. When the context changes, new possibilities emerge. Language is one of our greatest strengths and one of our biggest vulnerabilities. It allows us to imagine, plan, teach, create, and problem solve. We can warn others of danger, share wisdom, or remember the past, all without reliving it physically. That's powerful. But it also means we can suffer in ways that other species don't. We can relive pain, anticipate worst-case scenarios, or criticize ourselves endlessly. A deer doesn't lie awake fearing it will embarrass itself next spring, but people do because of the way language links experience, memory, and identity. Take the word apple. It has no inherent connection to the object that we see. It's a sound we've agreed to associate with a thing. That same symbolic learning lets us connect events that are similar in meaning, not just in form. It's also what makes us vulnerable to fusion, believing that the words in our heads are us or are absolute truths. This is where ACT introduces relational frame theory, the science behind how humans derive meaning through language. While we don't need to teach the theory in every session, we do help clients become aware of how language shapes their emotional world and how to loosen its grip through diffusion. When someone starts noticing that a thought is just a thought, not a command or a threat, they begin to reclaim their choice, their flexibility. And that's what ACT is really about. Awareness, flexibility, and actions guided by values. Thanks for watching this video on the key behavioral principles behind acceptance and commitment therapy. These foundational ideas like function over form, context, reinforcements, and the role of language are what shape how we think about human behavior and ACT. When we understand why people do what they do, we can guide them with more compassion, precision, and flexibility. If you found this video helpful, please consider giving it a like and subscribing to this channel. We're almost at 2,000. That's not only the support and work that I'm doing here on ACT on mental health, but also helps the content reach others who are trying to learn ACT, whether for their own growth or in their work with clients. And be sure to stay tuned for the next video in this series, where we'll begin exploring relational frame theory in detail and why it plays such a central role in both human suffering and transformation. Remember, your journey to a more purposeful and mindful life begins with a single click.